today with Chris DeRose from the Counterparty Foundation. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Theo. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. First of all, I'd also like to give a shout out to altcoinpress.com, coingecko.com/buzz, worldcryptonetwork.com, where you can also watch transmission episodes. Okay, Chris, Counterparty is an open source software and a coin, XCP. Does the Counterparty Foundation deal with both the open source project Counterparty and the coin XCP?
Yeah, so Counterparty is itself an open platform. It is open in the sense that Bitcoin is open and doesn't have a custodian or a center of control that is a company per se. There is a token that's associated with it, but it's not the primary token. The primary token of Counterparty is Bitcoin, and it runs on the Bitcoin blockchain, and it uses Bitcoin to perform 99% of its functions. The token is XCP, which is a gas that's used for smart contracts. And there's a couple other anti-spam prevention measures that it has, but the XCP isn't designed as like a speculative currency. What it is doing is setting aside a monetary supply for gasoline that's separate than Bitcoin. And that enables us to do a little bit more management of contracts and network capacity planning and such. Now, the foundation is the open elected position that is association that has directors, of which I'm one. Robert Ross is another. And the foundation tries to perform advocacy and assistance to the community members and things like that as part of its mission.
Okay, great. So you spoke of XCP as a kind of gasoline. Yeah, I get that. That makes sense. How was this XCP created?
Yeah, so this is kind of unique because there's not many people that do it the way we do it. We did it the same way Bitcoin does it, in the sense that you have to burn something of value in order to create XCP. And the money supply was designed to be created at a fixed amount. The burn time was January of 2014 to February, a little bit over a month, I want to say. And the way that you created XCP was to burn your Bitcoin. You sent your Bitcoin to a burn address, which was like one counterparty XXXXX. And in that process, the counterparty system then registered that burn with a corresponding amount of XCP. And that's that. We didn't collect any of the money. We don't have any speculative value that is unfair or in any way advantageous over somebody else. I have XCP, but I had to buy it just like everybody else. And that's how we did our process, which we did for a number of reasons. And it makes us, I think, a little bit more, what's the word? Yeah, really just egalitarian in the space. We're not doing it for a profit. We're doing it to make good software.
Okay, great. So it was basically burned, I think
Correct.
is what they call it. All right, great. What can I do on the Counterparty platform besides make tokens? A lot of people have heard about different meta tokens. There are a few well-known ones on there, of course, XCP. Let's see, what are some other, gems is on there. What are some other, do you know any other?
Sorry, LTV coin, folding coin. Smells of Genesis is getting started now. They're gonna have some cool stuff. We have, gems. I call it Storage is using our network for their tokens.
Right, Storage, exactly. Okay, so I think in general, people have heard of one or two of those, and they get, okay, that's a token, and it means something for that project, depending on the project. So, and you can make your own tokens. I think a lot of people get that. What else can I do on Counterparty platform?
So there are some built-in features that are kind of cool. We have a betting system that is part of the main system. It's pretty easy to use. And the idea is that you can establish a bet, either blue wins or price is going to be under an amount. They're not just binary options. They have a few other concepts. So those are in there. There's smart contracts, is really our biggest feature. We're the only guys that are offering smart contracts in the Metacoin space. And we're probably one of the most popular platforms that are offering smart contracts to some capacity. I would say that smart contracts aren't actually on mainnet yet. They're ready to go. We're really held up by the Ethereum project in order to actually release it. So it's a little frustrating for me because I've been using it at some length and I can't actually roll it out yet. But smart contracts are really the big differentiator between us and just about every other project in the space, certainly in the Metacoin space.
Okay, can you kind of clarify that? Because I did look a few times. I was, searching, okay, real simple smart contract Ethereum on Counterparty or some weird searches, Counterparty Ethereum contract example or whatever. And I couldn't really find anything. So I just thought, okay, from what I read, they did do it in theory and they tested it and it works, but so you said you're waiting for it to be Ethereum has to launch first? Is that a
Kind of, sort of. I think what we're trying to
mm,
do, we're trying to maintain compatibility with Ethereum so that we can offer our solutions in a Ethereum world with minimal friction for migrations. In terms of
mm,
examples, almost all of the Serpent examples that you've seen is going to run on our platform. So if you're searching, the keyword to look for is Serpent, and with Serpent you'll find tons of example contracts that you can work with. Some of them will be on my GitHub probably, and a lot of them really on the Ethereum world. And yeah, so there's not many people using it yet because it's very hard not to break compatibility with Ethereum. It's my personal belief that Ethereum is going to have some problems at launch. So what I would like to see happen is when those problems happen, we have a switch that can be flipped and run it on the Bitcoin blockchain as opposed to the problematic Ethereum blockchain. And so that's really what's holding us up right now.
okay, great. That's interesting to know. So, but related to that, I believe originally Counterparty ran or used part of the Bitcoin blockchain called OP return.
Mhm.
And it was originally 80 bytes of space that more or less go with every transaction. And I think I don't know the month in 2014, but I think first half of 2014, that was shortened with the release of Bitcoin to 40 bytes, so in half. And I believe that the Counterparty guys, you had to figure out a different way for the platform to work. It still works. It's just that you don't use OP return. Is that correct?
It's a little off. You got all the big
Okay.
parts listed there.
Okay. Okay.
So
Tell us what's up.
So all the meta coins for the longest time, I think we're using op check sig, and that was a really inefficient way of encoding data. It would, if you look at the way these mechanisms work, they're basic contracts, and these contracts are typically designed for very straightforward Bitcoin functions. But what we can do is get a little creative with them and encode our data into a standard transaction. So op check sig was the first such transaction type. Everybody quickly moved over to op multisig, which is what we were using for the first 6 months, I want to say, of our code base. Opcheck multisig, the way that works is it'll set up a 2 of 3 contract, of which 2 are bogus, and the number is the actual originator of the transaction. So if I were going to encode data, I'll create a 1 of 3 transaction. The money will be awarded right back to me as part of that 1 of 3, and then 2 of those 3 numbers are just binary data that we use to encode. Using that system, you can encode a lot of data. I think I've heard of 1 kilobyte being like doable for most miners. So you can get a 1 kilobyte op-check sig transaction through. Now, we never really liked doing it that way, and I don't think anybody wanted to do it that way. But I think there's a lot of politics in Bitcoin, so we have to kind of prove that this will be used for metadata. And that's the easy way to prove it. So I think that all of the miners got that. I think the miners recognize there's probably nothing they can do about that. So the next course of action is, well, how do we accommodate people so that it doesn't bloat the blockchain? To which the easy solution is and remains op return. Op return is currently limited at 40 bytes. So we use op return for any transaction that'll fit in 40 bytes. There are many transactions that fit in under 40 bytes. When the op return was on the table, what everybody had agreed upon, what was ratified, was an 80 byte op return. Of course, that's twice the size, and that gives us a lot more room to work with. And then at the last minute, I think Jeff Garzik just said, no, he's doing 40 bytes, and that's that, without a lot of fanfare. It was kind of weird. I'd like to know why he chose that. I'm sure I can guess the reasons, and they're probably good ones, but that kind of hampers our ability to reduce our blockchain bloat. We still work just fine through check multisig when it's over 40 bytes. And when it's under 40 bytes, we use op return. The nice thing about op return is that you've now signaled intent to the miners. And as part of that intent, they can do a lot of things, such as not retain the data portion of the op return. Thus, a lot they don't want to retain it, which is why it's nice, as opposed to op check multisig, which that also gets pruned because the unspent outputs will typically be claimed. But for anybody who's trying to save that data as like an archive, they don't have an easy way to know like where an op checks, an op multisig is used for data or when it's legitimate. And so it's a lot more obfuscated. So I expect that op return will be made larger over time because it does create bloat what we do. And we want to not create bloat as best as we're allowed to. And right now we're allowed to not create bloat for transactions under 48 bytes. So that's the whole thing. And that's true of, I think, almost every project that's using the blockchain right now. So I don't know how Factom is doing their stuff, but I'm sure they have something very similar. I see op return used more and more by stuff. I'll go to the blockchain explorers just to see. And I'm pretty sure Omni is using op return in the same way we are, and op checks multisig. So.
Okay, great. So to sum it up, from what I can understand, if the op return was enlarged back to 80, then overall you could do it a little more efficiently and have less bloat theoretically, right?
Correct. Yes. Correct.
Okay, great. Okay, well, that is a big topic. Everyone is afraid of blockchain bloat, and we're going to get really bloated. So it's going to be a continued discussion. Okay, you mentioned smart contracts and that you're waiting for Ethereum so that everything is compatible and all that. But let's go on and break that down first. What is a smart contract?
Yeah, there's a couple definitions floating out there. There's this Ricardian contract from the 90s that I think Szabo defined. Maybe no, Szabo didn't define it, but there's a smart contract definition based off of the Ricardian contract definition that Szabo defined in the 90s. And that's a pretty good one. But the gist of a smart contract is a piece of code that will reward property to a person automatically in a network, which I think is the simplest possible definition, which I have a couple problems with if you use it at that level, because we've had that smart contract by such a loose definition for many years in many ways, everything from centralized services to I don't know, automatic billing or something like that probably fits under that definition. So what I like to add to that definition, and what I think is pretty much the generally accepted definition at this point, is rewards value independent of an authority by way of a piece of code. So in that latter definition, the distinction is that you don't have the ability for censorship, moderation, or fiat mandate to change the outcome of the contract, and that financial instruments or classes of transfers and such will be executed automatically by a network without intervention or the ability for intervention. That's the definition that I prefer. And that's kind of a pedantic approach. What it means in real life, we can get into as well.
Okay, yeah, great. Yeah, we can do that. So just to kind of clear it up, a lot of times in these smart contracts, there's something called an oracle, or a third person that kind of gives the data. So is that a requirement for a smart contract, or how would that work if there were only two people?
So it's not a requirement for all smart contracts, but it's generally a requirement for contracts, almost all practical contracts. If you're not, the oracles are required because we need truth to be broadcasted. You might think to yourself, well, maybe truth could be voted upon or any of these things, but you're right back to the same sort of definition of what an oracle is. We take for granted that we have a computer, we go to ESPN, and we find out the sports score. But the sports scores are going to be slightly different on every machine, because maybe ESPN knows that like you're a Dolphins fan, so it shows you the Dolphins scores, or maybe they know you're a baseball fan. So the homepage itself is different. So the truth itself isn't necessarily what you see on a web screen. But then on top of that, you would have these sort of external interfaces for your blockchain. So the simple and most practical solution is to agree upon your news source at the time that the contract is created. And then in addition to that, you set an execution time. So what we'll say is a truth needs to be broadcasted by this Bitcoin address between this block and that block time. And that Bitcoin address presumably will be somebody who either has reputation management, or maybe they provide a service that's completely decoupled from the actual escrowing of funds to declare truth. So what I envision will happen is we'll have like these RSS feeds or something like that will broadcast very straightforward things like sports scores, ticker prices, maybe news events or something like that. And either it will be a service that people will provide for free to get traffic to their sites, or maybe there'll be some kind of a fee to register a broadcast in advance, and then it'll be broadcast. And the reputation of that provider will be important because they don't actually have any other incentive other than having a good reputation. So you think of like, I think a lot of people's minds, they think of the Oracle being the bookie or something like that, or the Oracle being one of the two parties. Well, the problem with that, of course, is how you have a financial stake in the output. So I think that most of these smart contracts will be broadcast independent of anybody who has a financial stake in the contract. So when you look at like a party, like a two-party thing, well, maybe they're going to bet on the sports score. So what they'll do is they'll look for bets and they'll be matched or something like that, and the actual score will come out of an ESPN broadcast. Maybe they'll broadcast on the blockchain, part of their services, the sports scores or something, or maybe there'll be a BitcoinBet.com that does it, which we actually have already in Counterparty. There's like BetXCP.com does that, and a few others. So yeah, you need an oracle to resolve truth, but you don't have to have an oracle. So there's some simple contracts that work entirely on well, it's randomness, roughly. It's deterministic randomness. But the idea is that like maybe there's a 33% chance that you win and a 66% chance that you lose. And the way that you determine that is by looking at the hash of the last block. So in that case, the oracle comes from the network itself. But yeah, that's the gist of what an oracle does. And they will be needed for as long as we have humans, I think. And we'll see. A lot of the smart contract stuff, I think, is not going to play out the way people think. I see a lot of people who want to apply to additional markets law or finance law, which there's room for. But I think that most of these contracts are going to be to mitigate counterparty risk more so than legal inefficiencies. So counterparty risk typically comes with like, what do they call it? Like when the Silk Road places crash or leave, they call them like seller exits or marketplace exits or something like that. Mm-hmm. The goal is to remove the incentives for anybody to hold funds, thus perverting their ability to provide goods and services. So we'll see things like maybe Twitch TV bets are going to be doable because Twitch TV has reduced its liability to merely broadcasting the outcome of a Twitch game or something like that. And then the network executes against that, and no funds are ever held in escrow by Twitch, so they have no legal liability for holding funds. And there's no counterparty risks to the bettors because the money is held in escrow by the network and not by any center. So we still decouple the broadcasting from the financial incentives, which is good. And those are the types of contracts I think we'll see off the bat. And there's plenty of others that I've heard of that are really good ideas. But I think most of the work early on is going to be entirely outside of traditional notions of what a contract is. It'll be solutions to things like seeding torrents, for example. It's a pretty good one. You've been on a site where like you wanted a torrent and like there's nobody seeding. So the idea would be, well, maybe I'll just post a bond for this torrent to be seeded. Anybody who seeds the torrent to me gets like $5 or something. So typically that would be a bad deal because there's a lot of counterparty risk. Somebody has to hold those funds in escrow. But in such a system, maybe the torrent clients are have a protocol to kind of manage these contracts. And you put your bounty up into the network and then somebody seeds it, at which point an oracle broadcasts that, yeah, the torrent tracker, for example, broadcasts this file's been seeded by this address, and then you can reward the contract funds back to that address. So that's where I think a lot of contracts are going to be at first. Over time, we may see them for more traditional purposes, but like I don't know that we'll ever see it for like property, like land property. I don't know that that'll happen. Finance, certainly we'll see it for. We'll see. A lot of this is getting the tools out there and seeing what people, like, we don't really know where the community's going to take it yet. Okay,
great. So yeah, you do need some kind of oracle that, you know, provides the data doesn't have a financial incentive in the deal.
Yeah.
That makes total sense. What is this thing called immutability?
Big deal. Big deal. I love immutability. That's kind of my platform, really. You know, there's a lot of attempts to define what a blockchain is. And you have guys like Preston Byrne who says, and Vitalik actually, who says it's just a database. But that's kind of silly to me, like right off the bat, because if it's just a database, A, why all of a sudden are all these people interested in databases after the year 2009? Two, why even have a word called blockchain then if it's just a database? Why not just call it a database? There has to be some differentiating factor between a blockchain and a database. So I asked myself then what made Bitcoin different in these terms? And immutability is the answer that I have championed and that I believe. And for a computer programmer, immutability means like this very sacred thing. Like they know when you say immutability, that's like a real thing. For people who have never heard the term before, it's a little bit abstract to them. But it's roughly this. There are values in the universe that are unchanging and that are constant and that they cannot be mutated. And these are typically things like pi or e or various, the speed of light perhaps in a vacuum. These are like big, heavy concepts. And in computer programming, we've never ever had that before. We've had, within a small context, some degree of unchangingness, but it would always depend on benevolence, depend on authority or some kind of collusion or trust relationship you had with the runtime environment. So like typically like your server, like you trust your server. So your server will keep that value constant, but it's not a truth of the universe that keeps that value constant. So when Bitcoin came around, now we had in decentralized terms, immutability being created for the persistence. So that's what sets Bitcoin apart. And certainly what sets blockchains apart is their immutability. Because if they're just databases, then who cares? Why are we here? That's what is very obviously being delivered by Bitcoin. And you see that in various ways. We talk about the double spend problem being averted. Well, the reason why that was solved was because we had this immutability by which truth was declared and could not be redefined by a second party later on. Almost all of the main themes of Bitcoin and its innovations tie into this notion of what we can do now with immutability. And we can go on from there, but that's what immutability roughly is in big terms.
Okay, great. Well, there's also a lot of talk about side chains and how that's going to affect things, and that you can use them for all kinds of cool things like smart contracts, like tokens, like your own little personal side chain that is pegged to the Bitcoin blockchain. Is that going to make Counterparty or the counterparty on the Bitcoin blockchain and XCP useless?
Yeah, so I get that question a lot, and no, it definitely doesn't. In the same way that like OpReturn didn't make Counterparty useless, side chains won't. We want to work with the devs on the blockchain. We're trying to provide solutions now, and we're doing them now. And as the developers see what we're doing and they realize how they can better support us, they add additional features to Bitcoin. We're the ones who are pioneering a lot of the need for these things. So when side chains are usable, we have an implementation that can work. It's highly probable that we'll be leveraging them in some significant capacity. You'll still need a smart contract execution environment that will not be provided by the Bitcoin network. You'll still need tokenized assets to work with in those ways. Those might actually be provided by the Bitcoin network, but certainly not the same smart contract. So it doesn't make us redundant at all. It gives us more tools to work with. I will say that I'm a little skeptical of side chain problems. Like Peter Todd did a great discussion on the problems that he has with side chains on one of the LTD episodes that I would highly recommend people check out. In part, you're checking value out of the Bitcoin network. It gives a weird incentive structure by which people can, in fact, attack the Bitcoin network by way of reducing the security of the sidechain. And in addition to that, sidechains won't be providing the same level of immutability. So what may end up happening is that we allow our users the option to choose whatever immutability they need. So if maybe they're doing something that's in a very regulated environment, they're going to want as much immutability as possible. But maybe if they're doing something like kind of incidental, they just need like tokenized representations for, they may check it out into a side channel sometime. So there's a lot of options for us, and really it depends on what the final implementation is. But we are always embracing as many Bitcoin features as we give it. So sidechains will be no different. It's not like we're going to have sidechains that is now going to make us less inclined to provide our software for Bitcoin. It's just going to make it more inclined to provide software around Bitcoin. Because all of those features are really designed to projects like ours.
Okay, great. Yeah, I thought it was a question that you probably get a lot. And you probably get this question a lot too. What about altcoins that are able to use the full OP return and can deal with bloat better? Are they a better choice for releasing a metacoin, tokens, or even doing smart contracts, since they don't have the same constraints as Bitcoin, have faster confirmations, etc.? What do you think?
Yeah, so there's a handful of problems with that. You start going to the altcoin for the train. I'm very skeptical about altcoins. I think many in the community at this point are. We've had thousands of them, and they've all had the same plight. And every time like a new audience comes into Bitcoin, like right now it's the bankers, they try to create their own altcoins, and they all end up the same. The coins end up not getting the same immutability for all kinds of reasons. The developer community ends up not saying they're all crazy in order to distribute the token and all this stuff. There's a couple things. I think the block times of Bitcoin are a feature, not a bug. You don't quite realize there's always opportunity costs for all of these design decisions. So yeah, you see that confirmation times are lower, but what's the other side of it? Well, you're getting less immutability. Also, you have additional soft forks. So it's not as if the limited block time is something that was like a bug that we're stuck with necessarily. It happens to be pretty well calibrated, all said and done. You got to recognize that a lot of these altcoins, all they do is go into the source code and change like 10 lines. So like the difference between Litecoin and Bitcoin is like tiny. It's not like the innovation was the result of like R&D that these people put into it, that they discovered some new technology. They just went in there and there's a setting and there's a knob and they turned it like to the left a little bit, which is fine. But they're typically not understanding what the opportunity cost is. And they're typically doing these things to market to people to sell their token. So yeah, the block times I think are kind of a non-issue for a lot of reasons. We have fairly low number of soft forks in Bitcoin, which is really useful. Whereas when you have something with low block times, you're going to have a lot of reorgs, you're going to have larger forks because the propagation time relative to the block time is very high. And that's what happens when you make that change. Now, similarly, the only block time that like ever really matters to me is in terms of an advancement would be like 0 seconds. Like if you did something instantly, then that would be a major improvement. Now, we're not quite there, but we kind of are in Bitcoin because what we have are various forms of bonding and insurance. So like a BIP70 is one that's been around for a while. If you've ever wondered why you can always check something out in Bitcoin instantaneously, yet there's this 10-minute block time that's supposed to be the bane of your existence, it's because that transaction was bonded, it was posted into the mempool, and it is now being secured by some party, typically. So you can get insurance options. It's a degree of decentralization because these insurance providers are typically Coinbase and BitPay, or Circle and some other guys, Bitpagos. But if you need a quick checkout or something like that, because it's a small amount and convenience matters, you will get it instantaneously. And so you don't have that kind of network effect in these altcoins. These altcoins are not going to do that because they're smaller networks and because the network effect matters. So I don't think that, at least for that one issue, certainly there's much of an advantage over Bitcoin and certainly not Counterparty. Now, as far as like op returns and things like that, like all of these coins are doomed to repeat the same problems that Bitcoin has. The reason that they don't have those problems is they don't have the volume and they don't have the market caps and the incentive structures that Bitcoin has. So in the case of op return, you can make any number of bytes in your op return that you want. Like Ethereum now is going to make something effectively humongous in their chain. I don't know what the analog is even, and I don't know what the number is set to, but I do know that testnet was already at like 30 gigabytes after like 3 months or so. Now they're turning on some pruning, and we'll see what happens. But it's not the case that you just magically set this value to infinite or something like that, or you set the block time to 0, and now your problems are solved. No, you have to understand the opportunity cost. And this gets into the nature of Bitcoin too. Bitcoin is immutable in the sense that it has been immutable for about 6 years now. But every 10 minutes, like it could die. Like we don't think so, but there's a heartbeat, and this thing could be killed, and that's it. The great Bitcoin experiment is over, and we didn't achieve immutability after all. Well, you have the same kind of thing going on with these altcoins, except that the cards are stacked against them significantly more so than us because they have less resources. They haven't had the same trials by fire. The people involved are usually not as committed as you see in Bitcoin, and on and on and on. So these altcoins will be around for a while. The community is really skeptical of them. What I do like, I think like Monero is like really doing well with this, is that the developers are starting to realize that the quick buck isn't going to be there anymore, and like these NEM is like pumping still. If you're doing a blockchain, probably at this point has a pretty good idea you're a scammer and they're not going to invest. That's a good thing, I think. Now, I don't know what that's going to mean as it reverberates from here. If that means that there'll be less developers doing altcoins and then it dies, or if it means that altcoins will be even less prepared with fewer finances. I don't know, but I think that the community is very wary about these altcoins. Bitcoin does a lot; it's getting better every single year, and these altcoins will start up. They'll pop in and out, 6 months or so, and they always promise something. So it was like anonymity, or it's block times, and then the other side of that is that like whenever somebody invents something good like Monero with their ring signatures, that'll get put right into Bitcoin. Like we appreciate that, Monero. Same with Ethereum. Ethereum had Serpent, and Bitcoin said thank you Ethereum, and now Counterparty offers that on the Bitcoin blockchain. So that network effect is a very real thing, and it's one of the reasons why I'm very skeptical of the altcoins, and it's one of the reasons why I don't particularly see that as like a major competition for us at Counterparty, because they just don't offer immutability and a community the way that we are.
Okay, great. That's a cool perspective. I see what you mean. Yeah, that's true. There's a big network. I guess if you're a coin dev out there, you could release an altcoin with unlimited OP return, and yeah, you might be out really soon before Ethereum. Who knows? No, I'm just joking. Now, I hope Ethereum comes out soon. Everyone is waiting for it, and everybody wants to use Serpent to do these cool smart contracts and whether it's on the Bitcoin blockchain or if it's on Ethereum or other projects. Everybody's waiting. So let's get this thing released. All right. Well, we've come to an end. Do you have any final words? How can we get in touch? How can we get involved in the Counterparty project? How can we learn about doing smart contracts on the Bitcoin blockchain, etc.?
Yeah, so anybody who has questions, you can always tweet me at DeRose Tech. If you have something that won't fit in 140 characters, the Counterparty forums are wonderful. And you can check out the, what is the Counterparty, counterpartytalk.org, which I frequent often. So I try to respond to as much as I can there. And certainly there's my YouTube channel, which you may or may not have seen at this point, which is available. It's DeRose 36. Chris see all of that. And if you end up liking some of the tokenization stuff and you really get involved, we run a chit chat on Skype, which is a pretty active community at this point. And people always weigh in with their 2.0 ideas and projects and asking questions. And I'm pretty active in there. So you can always join that channel. And I think that's all of it. I've been running like a content production factory in the last year or so, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. But it's amazing how much content there is out there. The space is growing so fast. It's astonishing.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, great. Yeah.
I mean, you're doing it too. I mean, you know it. You've got a show and you see what it takes. And I mean, I'm sure. I don't know if you're like this, but when I started Bitcoin, like I knew probably like 60 to 70% of what there was to know about Bitcoin. I went through the source code. I knew all the people. I read the forums. And now I've been doing it. I've been doing it full time. I've been studying, reading, and now I know like maybe 15% of Bitcoin. You know.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we're in hyperspeed.
Yeah,
definitely. Okay, so if you want to buy XCP so you can use it on, in the Counterparty system, I know it's traded over at Poloniex, and it might be traded at some other places, and I think you can still get it on the Decentral Exchange. Does the Decentral Exchange on Counterparty still work, that you can buy XCP with Bitcoin on there?
You can't buy XCP with Bitcoin on there, no. You can do XCP for any other asset, but not actually Bitcoin. It has to do with the nature of how escrow is unescrowable. Now, shapeshifter is really great and easy, but I mean, realistically, you probably won't need it, unless you're a dev right now. So I don't actually even like to recommend that people buy it. It's fine if you do. You want to create some assets, then yeah, you'll need it. Let's Talk Bitcoin is really doing a lot of fun stuff, including their Tokenly project. And I would probably advocate that you look at some of the assets on there, and more so than getting into XCP. Play with some of the assets. There's some really cool stuff out there. Like Spells of Genesis, what they're doing is really great. They're doing a card game, and they're representing their cards as assets that you can redeem in the game with a card to play with. So that kind of stuff is really cool. And I would push it more towards that side of the network than anything else.
Okay, great. So you can check that out. Be sure to thumbs up this video, subscribe, and share. I want to also check out altcoinpress.com, coingecko.com, and their blog /buzz. Also check out World Crypto Network. You're watching this show, Transmission 40 on World Crypto Network. Thanks a lot for watching, and talk to you next time. Thanks a lot.
Later, party people.